Today's session is about a case of pheochromocytoma, and Dr. Akshata Parni, third year postgraduate student from Chennai City branch, and Dr. Naveen from Railway Hospital, PhD student from Railway Hospital, Perambur, will be presenting the case of a 40-year-old female posted for pheochromocytoma excision. I welcome Professor Nagasamy to conduct the session. Thank you, sir. Over to Professor Nagasamy, sir.
We have given the case scenarios in a one-liner as a 40-year-old lady posted for pheochromocytoma excision. Okay. Dr. Akshata, are you a post-DA candidate or a straight MD candidate? Or
Good evening, sir. I'm final year MD-PG, sir.
MD-PG at MMC?
At Sri Balaji Medical College.
Sri Balaji Medical. Okay, right. Have you ever anesthetized a patient with pheochromocytoma?
No, sir.
No, even I have not done one. I have done only one case. That too, I was only a bystander. I am not anesthetized. So this shows the rarity of this condition, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
What is the percentage of patients who are likely to suffer from this disease?
It's less than 10%, sir. That too in hypertensive patients.
Less than 10%. That's a big number you are giving.
Less than 0.2% actually.
It's less than 0.21% among the public. Okay, right. So, okay. So anyway, we will all be talking more about theory, and it is more important from theory point of view, because this question of giving anesthesia for pheochromocytoma excision is often asked in the theory paper rather than your practical experience of doing it may occur very rarely. We have to have a basic fundamental knowledge of our theory so that we know, in case we happen to come across a patient like this, we have to know at least some basics about managing this patient. Right. You have sent a nice set of PPTs. If you want to display that and talk, you can do that.
Yes, sir. I'll do that, sir.
All the participants, please put up your questions and answers to Professor's questions in our chat box, and your questions will be answered by Professor and other candidates at the end of the session. Thank you.
Sir, I'm actually not able to share the video.
Okay. Right, no problem. Then you just close it and start describing whatever you have put up in the video, PPT, you can just start talking.
Yes, sir.
You can close that sharing window.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Sir, my patient is a 40-year-old female. She's been posted for excision of pheochromocytoma tumor.
Very
so
good.
her main chief complaints were headache, palpitation, and sweating, which has been there for the past 6 months. And history of presenting complaints, if you see, the headache is for duration of more than 6 months, which is episodic in nature and is more in the occipital side. And it was rapid in onset, and it was associated with some work and stress. It was more, and she also had some palpitations along with it, but there was no any chest pains associated with the palpitations. And there was some history of excessive sweating. History of sweating was there. That is also for the past 6 months. So negative history, when I had her, she had no history of dyspnea and the weight loss, fatigue, palpitations alone was there, and polyuria, polydipsia, orthostatic giddiness, and altered mental status, seizures, stroke, all those symptoms were not there, and nausea, and even symptoms related to Men's syndrome was not there, and arrhythmia changes or hypertensive stress changes was also not there, sir.
Okay. So, do you think it could be a simple essential hypertension?
Can be, sir.
Can be. So, how to differentiate? Is there any clinical way of differentiating between essential hypertension and secondary hypertension due to pheochromocytoma?
Sorry, sir, I'm not able to get you, sir. Sir?
No, are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir. Now I'm able to.
My question is how to differentiate clinically between an essential or essential hypertension, which normally we say have no cause at all, primary hypertension,
Yes, sir.
and hypertension due to pheochromocytoma. Are there any differentiating clinical features present in
In
this?
essential hypertension, patient can have any other cause, will not be having any other cause. In pheochromocytoma, the tumor might be the cause. And clinically also, this hypertension is not usually reduced with any antihypertensives. So, and the BP, there can be even postural changes associated. In essential hypertension, mostly there will not be any postural changes. So, orthostatic hypertension.
What is described as the classical clinical triad of pheochromocytoma hypertension?
Yes, sir. It can be associated with headache, palpitation, and sweating, sir.
Sweating. Okay. So normal essential hypertension, very rarely you get this combination. Okay. And what are the other 5 things which is described as 5 P's of pheochromocytoma hypertension?
Yes, sir. It's the pain, which is headache. Pressure is the blood pressure is increased, and perspiration, sweating, and then paroxysmal, and pallor can be there, and one more P is
Palpitations also.
palpitations. Palpitations.
Okay. Okay. So normally in essential hypertension, all these combinations will not be there. Okay. So this is and the intensity is very high. What about the grade of hypertension? Is it very mild while starting itself, like the essential hypertension, or it will be very high even in the beginning?
It's very high from the beginning, sir. At the time of diagnosis itself,
Diagnosis itself very high. Okay. So what is the pathophysiology behind this occurrence of such a very high hypertension in pheochromocytoma?
So the pheochromocytoma is nothing but the tumor which are secreted from the catecholamines excess from the adrenal medulla. So these adrenal medullary tumors, they secrete the catecholamines, mainly the epinephrine, norepinephrine hormones. So all these induces the stress responses, and this causes the hypertension changes and all the other changes which has been there in pheochromocytoma.
Now, what is the normal method of synthesis of catecholamines? What is the physiology of synthesis of catecholamines?
So basically, the essential amino acid, the phenylalanine, from which the tyrosine is there, from the hydrolysis enzyme, it causes the tyrosine. And this tyrosine, it again undergoes the hydroxylation by tyrosine hydrolase enzyme. And this causes the DOPA. And the DOPA undergoes the decarboxylation and forms the dopamine. And this dopamine undergoes the hydrolation by the enzyme dopamine hydrolase. And then it forms the norepinephrine, and which further forms the epinephrine and other end products like the normetanephrine, epinephrine, and then finally the VMA, vinyl mandelic acids.
Right. That is the metabolism. Before, after it has completed their action, norepinephrine and epinephrine, they are broken down and metabolized to metanephrines and normetanephrine. Okay, that is not the actual synthesis. Synthesis is over up to the level of manufacturing of epinephrine. Okay, after that it becomes metabolized and then broken down to its ingredients into metanephrine and normetanephrine. Okay, right. In what is the normal amount of epinephrine that is synthesized in the body in health?
Less than 20 to 200 mg per day. Less than that only it will be there.
Mg or PG?
Sorry, PG per day.
What is PG?
Picogram.
Picogram. Okay, good. How much is 1 picogram?
Not sure, sir.
Not sure. 10 to the power of 9 minus 10 to the power of 9. So very small quantities. Okay. So which is produced more in normal health? Epinephrine or norepinephrine?
Epinephrine is 80% of the epinephrine, sir. Only 20% is norepinephrine.
20% is norepinephrine. But which is the more active?
Norepinephrine.
Norepinephrine is more active.
Yes.
Whereas in pheochromocytoma, what happens?
In pheochromocytoma, norepinephrine is produced more than epinephrine.
So what is the ratio?
Norepinephrine 3:1, sir. 3:1.
85% norepinephrine and 15% epinephrine. Okay.
Okay.
So what is the difference in health when you get more epinephrine and lesser amount of norepinephrine, whereas in pheochromocytoma you get more amount of norepinephrine and less amount of epinephrine. So in the blood pressure change, what will be the difference?
Yes, sir. The norepinephrine is produced more, so usually there will be narrow pulse pressure hypertension can be there, sir, and there will be reflex bradycardia, sir.
Very good. Whereas
And
if supposing
epinephrine,
epinephrine is produced more,
yes, sir. Then the systolic blood pressure will be high, and the diastolic blood pressure will be low, and there will be tachycardia, sir.
tachycardia. So from clinically, by measuring the blood pressure and pulse rate itself, we can identify whether the tumor is secreting more of norepinephrine or epinephrine. Okay, this is a very important clinical examination that you have to carry out. Okay.
Okay.
What will happen to the patient if you don't treat this condition? Supposing this lady has come to the hospital with a BP of 220 by 130 and gives a classical history of paroxysmal headache, perspiration, palpitation, all these things are there, and you make a clinical diagnosis of pheochromocytoma in this patient. What will happen if this patient is not treated?
So this increased BP for a prolonged time can cause like end organ damage to all the vital organs. So in the heart, if you see, because of this catecholamine increase, it can cause catecholamine myopathy. In the renal also, it can be affected, and then it can increase risk of CVA can be there. It can precipitate stroke for the patient, and increase rhabdomyolysis, muscle breakdowns can be there, and other organs also it can, and even.
So in the order of severity, which system will be first affected?
Cardiac, sir.
Cardiac will be first affected. Very good. Then what is the next system which is in grave danger?
The renal system.
Renal or neural? Central nervous system.
Central nervous system stroke.
So the second system which is in grave danger is central nervous system. Then in the long run, kidney will also be affected. Okay, so these are the three systems that can be affected. Do all patients with pheochromocytoma come with these classical symptoms?
No, sir.
Okay.
Very few patients.
Very few. So most of them may be asymptomatic. Okay.
Yes, sir. It's only.
So when a patient comes with first time to the hospital and you make the BP is high, say for example, this lady has come to your Balaji Medical College Hospital and you measure the BP and it is 200 by 120, first measurement. Will you immediately brand her as a patient of pheochromocytoma?
No, sir. So immediately the patient can be under stress. She could have just come into the hospital. She can have white coat hypertension. So all that will be there. So I would ideally ask the patient to rest out for some time. Again, take a repeat BP. And if the BP is still persistently high, then I would like to admit her and even follow her up. And then if she's, I'd ask her to start on antihypertensives and even add a second antihypertensive. If it's still not under control, then I'll have a suspicion of pheochromocytoma and then I'll go for the other investigations.
So if you find the first BP high and then wait for some time and second BP is also high, what is that BP called? As long as she is in the hospital, all the BP readings are high. But once you ask her to go home and record the BP with a BP monitor at home, which she says it is 130/80. What will you call that hypertension, which is rising only when she comes to hospital and sees the doctor?
It's office hypertension or a white coat hypertension.
It is a hospital or white coat hypertension. So how to rule out whether it is a white coat hypertension or essential hypertension?
So initially you can try to develop a good rapport with the patient and try to calm her down, ask her to rest out for some time, or if it is a male, ask him like to stop the smoking for some time so that even that can increase the BP. So then after resting and still it is high, then we can suspect. And even other causes, primary cause, if some primary cause is not there, then we can think it is white coat hypertension, sir. But if any other primary causes is there, then it can high suspicion of essential hypertension.
Okay. My question is how to differentiate with this. Is there any objective method of distinguishing between a white coat hypertension and an essential hypertension? Any method of continuously monitoring the patient's BP even when they are at home?
At home?
Have you heard
Continuous
of continuous and ambulatory monitoring of
Ambulatory
blood pressure?
monitoring. Yes.
So that can be done, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So if you record that, if you have a suspicion or when you want to distinguish between an essential hypertension and a white coat hypertension, you have to put the patient on continuous ambulatory monitoring or Holter monitoring. That is the name for
Holter.
that is Holter monitoring. Okay, and try to record the BP both during wake time, the daytime, as well as during the night. When will usually the BP will peak up? When the patient goes to sleep.
Sir, in the like between 3 a.m. the time when the cortisol hormones increase will be there. So mostly that time the increase will be there.
Very good. So the diurnal variation in cortisol production is the cause for the early morning rise in BP, and that is the common time patients with essential hypertension not under proper medication will develop incidence of stroke or myocardial infarction is very high in this early morning time because of this reason. Okay. Now, what is accelerated hypertension and what is malignant hypertension?
Accelerated hypertension is BP more than 200, sir. So it is accelerated hypertension. And,
Isolated, I'm asking accelerated, not isolated. Accelerated and malignant hypertension.
Accelerated hypertension.
Isolated is only isolated systolic blood pressure. Okay, whereas
Yes,
accelerated hypertension, what is
is but increase in both systolic and diastolic more than 200 per 100 mmHg, sir.
So straight away, supposing all the readings are 200 by 100, will you say it is accelerated, or the name itself is telling you some clue? Acceleration. When you go in a car, you start at a low speed. Then you increase put the pedal or press the accelerator pedal, then the car goes faster and faster. So there should be a meaning for that word accelerated hypertension.
It keeps increasing, sir.
So the BP which has been near normal starts rising in a very fast time. Okay, within a short span, it increases more and more and goes to higher and higher level. That is called accelerated hypertension. So initially you measure it is 140, 100. Within half an hour it becomes 160, 110. Another half an hour it becomes 180, 120. Like that, when it gradually over a period of time increases more and more, it is called accelerated hypertension. And this, when it exceeds 200 and diastolic 120, it may be called as malignant hypertension. But what is the clinical difference that you have to make out between accelerated and malignant? One test is very important in differentiating a simple accelerated hypertension and the malignant hypertension.
Fundal examination.
Excellent. Who said that? Good. Fundal examination. What will you see in the fundus examination?
Sir, in accelerated hypertension, there will be cotton wool X-rays, whereas in malignant, it will be papilledema.
Cotton wool is the first stage of papilledema. Okay, cotton wool appearance or the what is called the strict lining, the arteries pressing over the veins, grade 1 hypertension. All these things are parts of papilledema. Cotton wool appearance is grade 2, and frank hemorrhage and macular edema is grade 3. Okay, they all belong to the papilledema grading. Whereas in accelerated hypertension, it has not reached the stage of papilledema. Okay, whereas malignant hypertension has reached the stage of papilledema when you do a fundus examination. It may be grade 1 or grade 2 or grade 3. And because of this difference, accelerated is a medical urgency, whereas malignant hypertension is a medical emergency. Okay, accelerated hypertension is a medical urgency. You have to attend to the patient as quickly as possible. Whereas in malignant hypertension, you have to treat it as an emergency basis immediately. Okay? So, what is the best method of managing a malignant hypertension or of accelerated hypertension for that matter? How do you treat? Supposing you find a patient going in for rapid increase in the BP, and fundus shows some grade papilledema grade 1, 2 changes. How to?
You should advise the patient to get admitted in the hospital.
Very good.
Then try to start her on antihypertensives.
what antihypertensive will act immediately and try to reduce the blood pressure. Do you have to give it orally or do you have to give parenterally, which will be a better method?
Since it's an accelerated or malignant, we can even start the patient on intravenous antihypertensive, sir. So even NTG can be started in this patient, sir. So it is rapid in onset. So NTG can be started, and vasodilatory effects are also there. So safe for the heart also.
So when you start a patient on NTG or SNP to control the blood pressure, what is the grade at which you should decrease the blood pressure? Can you bring down a blood pressure which is 220 over 130 to suddenly 140, 80 or 130, 80?
No, sir.
What is the level by which you should decrease the BP? How many millimeters of mercury can be decreased per hour?
Not more than 20 mmHg per hour.
Why should you take that care not to suddenly reduce the BP?
Sudden reduce in blood pressure can cause hypoperfusion.
Hypoperfusion. What is the correct explanation for that? See, once a patient has been consistently having a very high BP, what happens to the autoregulation?
Autoregulation will be disrupted, sir.
Shifted to the right side. So it is on the higher, so mean arterial pressure and autoregulatory range will be on the higher side. So when you suddenly decrease it and bring down the mean arterial pressure, a rapidly decreasing patient can go in for a CVA. So that will be the problem. So that you should avoid. So you must gradually decrease the BP over a period of 4 to 6 hours and not bring down the BP suddenly by infusing a large dosage of NTG or SNP. Okay? So these are all associated questions with hypertension which can be asked in the examination, because we are also going to have essential hypertension with hernia or hydrocele may be kept in the examination. So this knowledge will help you to answer those questions. So once the clinical diagnosis or suspicion of pheochromocytoma is made, how do you make a confirmation or how do you diagnose this condition?
Investigation.
Or establish the diagnosis rather with investigation.
The investigations, there is routine investigation and specific investigations. So routine investigations, the complete blood count. In complete blood count in patients with the pheochromocytoma can have polycythemia. So in polycythemia, hematocrit count will be increased, and the renal function test can be done, the creatinine and urea. So this assess the end organ damage if any there. And other tests for the routine thing is for diabetic profile, fasting blood sugar, postprandial HbA1c, and electrolytes, sodium, potassium, chloride, and even calcium should be done to rule out any Men's syndrome associated parathyroid because of the hypercalcemia there. So along with calcium, I would also ask for the albumin. So because the corrected value, then only I'll be able to get. And then other investigations like chest X-ray. In pheochromocytoma, patient can present with cardiomegaly, and so for that I want to do a chest X-ray, and also as a part of routine investigation. And ECG changes can also be there in pheochromocytoma, like patient can have any sinus tachycardia or even any arrhythmias, or any because of increased hypertension there can be any LVH pattern or LBBB or RBBB patterns, and any ischemia changes can also be there. So SDTV changes can be there.
Can you differentiate a cardiomegaly made out of cardiomyopathy induced by pheochromocytoma and left ventricular hypertrophy induced cardiomegaly in the
In echo only, I think we can at least try to differentiate the same.
Okay. Is there anything by ECG, can you differentiate between a cardiomyopathy and a cardiac hypertrophy using cardiomegaly?
In ECG, sir?
Will cardiomyopathy also produce ECG changes like left ventricular hypertrophy, or left ventricular hypertrophy?
Cardiomyopathy, left ventricular hypertrophy changes will not be.
Not there. So that is the difference. If it is purely due to the severe hypertension producing LVH, then you will find the changes in the V1 to V6, the leads where the R wave and S waves are all very tall, and they come. How do you diagnose LVH in the ECG?
Tall T waves will be there, sir. Mostly in the
All
V5.
T waves.
QRS.
How do you diagnose left ventricular hypertrophy?
No.
What? Huh?
R wave in V5, V6 plus Q wave in V1, V2. Sir.
Q wave.
Not Q wave, sir. I mean,
Yes, sir.
S wave.
wave in V1, V2, S wave in V5,
More than
V6.
35 millimeter.
Yeah. So the V1 to V6, initially you will find only the deep S waves. R waves are very small. But as the lead goes to 5 and 6 away, then there is what is called the R wave progression. R wave becomes bigger and bigger, and then so a combination of these two, V1 and V5 or V6, produce a total of more than 35 small squares. Okay, and then you diagnose the LVH. This is very commonly asked in the examination. They may show you the ECG also and ask you this question. Okay? Right. So, okay. So these are all some of the general investigations that we do. What about the specific investigations to confirm your diagnosis? Hello? Hello?
Hello, sir.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
I think Shuta's.
Sorry, sir, my connection got lost.
Yeah, no problem. So, what are the other investigations you would like to do?
Echocardiography, sir.
Okay.
And
So, these are all general investigations that you routinely do for all patients. What about the specific investigations?
Urinary 24-hour urinary metanephrines, and that is the investigation of choice. And
For everybody?
other-
For all the cases you will do that, or is it selectively for some cases?
So 24-hour urinary metanephrines we can do. Plasma epinephrines is mainly for patients who are anuric or oliguric patients. We can do plasma epinephrines.
Or is it more indicated in low probability and high probability cases? Okay, more than
High
anuric or non-anuric. If you don't suspect, for example, a patient is having a high BP, say 190, 120 all the time, but you have a mild suspicion that it may be pheochromocytoma, but you are not very confident to say that this is classical because they don't have that perspiration, palpitation, and the intense headache is not there. But all the time the BP is so high, so you want to rule out pheochromocytoma, which is called a low probability patient. Okay, so in that case, you can just do a 24-hour urine collection for estimation of metanephrines and catecholamines. On the contrary, if you suspect a patient to have a high probability of pheochromocytoma, like having a severe headache, palpitation, perspiration, all the classic triads are there, then you go for plasma free metanephrines and normetanephrine estimation. How do they come into this is a metabolic product. How do you find these products in the blood or in the plasma? Normally, any product which has been broken down will be excreted in the urine, and we usually test them for in the urine only, isn't it? But why do you test it in the plasma or the blood? Why do they occur in the blood itself, the metabolic products? Okay, the answer for that is because of the extreme or excess amount of catecholamines that are being secreted. Most of them is metabolized in the adrenal medulla itself. Instead of going to the outside the medulla and then coming into the bloodstream and getting metabolized, there is a pathway by which it gets metabolized in the adrenal medulla itself. And so that metabolized products, they mingle along with the catecholamines that are secreted and they come into the bloodstream, and that is how you are able to estimate the plasma free metanephrine and normetanephrine levels. Okay.
Okay.
Any idea as to what should be the level of those two metabolic products in the blood? What is the limit?
More
By
than 2000.
2000 will be there in a crisis, but in a resting stage, if you take what should be the value of normetanephrine to confirm that it might be a case of pheochromocytoma?
400 sir.
400
And 200 sir. 220.
400 and 220 per what? How many microgram or picogram per ml or deciliter or liter?
Picogram per ml sir.
Per ml, yes. So that should be the value. So anything about 400 for normetanephrine and 220 for metanephrine picogram per ml is the value for which you can confirm that it could be a case of supposing the values are all equivocal, it is neither low nor high, then are there any tests to confirm or stimulate and see whether it can be a case of pheochromocytoma?
Clonidine suppression test and glucagon stimulation test.
Very good. There are two tests, one to suppress, one to stimulate. What will happen if you do the suppression test?
There will be a hypotensive crisis, sir.
Hypotensive crisis in all patients?
No, in patients with pheochromocytoma.
Pheochromocytoma, they will have hypotension, isn't it? Or normal patient will have hypotension?
Normal patient will
Normal
have
patient will have a hypotension and pheochromocytoma will not have.
Will not have. So if you try to do a suppression, they will not be suppressed because pheochromocytoma is producing enormous quantities of catecholamines. Only patients with essential hypertension will go for a severe hypotension. Okay, so you can easily distinguish between a essential hypertension and a hypertension because in pheochromocytoma, after administration of clonidine, there will not be any drastic fall in the blood pressure. Whereas in essential hypertension, which we our day-to-day practice itself we will be seeing when you use clonidine or dexmedetomidine intraoperatively. What is the reason for our administration of dexmedetomidine or clonidine in our regular practice now?
Hypotensive anesthesia.
Hypotensive. Are you doing it for hypotensive? If you give a small
ICU sedation.
ICU sedation, pre-medication also they can give for hypotension.
intraoperatively, if you are going to use these drugs, what is the purpose?
Analgesic purpose also there's a sedative purpose, analgesic, and even hypotension.
It is called opioid sparing
Opioid
technique.
sparing.
So we are trying to avoid the usage of more opioid related drugs by using these drugs. Okay, what are the advantages of using this dexmedetomidine or clonidine in regular anesthesia practice?
We can also, along with the analgesia and sedation, it also produces hypotension. So bloodless field can be provided for the surgeons.
Any other reason?
It also increases the duration of the regional anesthesia, spinal and epidural.
Okay, if you add as an adjuvant, but when you directly inject it parenterally, one important action.
Less likely to cause apnea.
Less likely to cause apnea. Okay.
It decreases the volatile, sir.
What is the effect on the body temperature? What will it prevent? It will prevent shivering. It will prevent shivering. Recovery shivering will be abolished. Okay, that is why we use it even for spinal shivering cases. One of the drug recommended is dexmedetomidine. Even well in advance before you give the spinal, it is supposed to completely block the shivering effect. And the stressor response to extubation is very much reduced. Okay, so patients, when they recover them after anesthesia by reversing the relaxant effect and then make them conscious, some of them buck and cough with the endotracheal tube and have a very serious increase in the blood pressure and tachycardia. All these things happen. Whereas if you have administered sufficient quantities of dexmedetomidine, they tolerate the tube very well without having any response, sympathetic stimulation due to the presence of endotracheal tube in the trachea. Okay, that is another big advantage with this drug which has been introduced now. Right. So the one test is to suppress and see whether it is getting suppressed by using clonidine. What about the other one?
Glucagon stimulation.
Provocation test. How does it help? Glucagon, what does it do?
It increases by 3-fold times, sir.
So if you give glucagon, patient's BP will go up.
Yes, sir.
Yes. And what will happen to the insulin level?
Is also increased. Glucagon opposite to that.
Glucagon is a counter-regulatory hormone to insulin. It doesn't allow the action of insulin to come, isn't it? So what will happen? Hyperglycemia will happen because of the reduced action. Okay, right. So these are the biochemical tests that you can carry out to assess the levels of the catecholamines and its metabolic products. Any other test you have to do before you subject the patient to surgery?
Radiological investigations can be done.
Why do you want to do the radiological investigations?
To find out the location, the size of the tumor, and to see whether it's like adrenaline or extra adrenaline tumors or an abdomen. To localize the site, sir.
What is the rule of 10% in pheochromocytoma tumors?
So it's 10% familial, 10% extra adrenaline, 10% benign, 10% in childhood, 10% bilateral, and 10% is recurrent, and 10% malignant incidental also.
Okay, very good. So to locate that only, we are going to. So what is the why there is so much variation? What is the embryological development of this tumor?
It arises from the neural crest cells, from the chromaffin cells, which comes from the neural crest cells. So it's arising from that.
So what is the peculiarity of these chromaffin cells? Are they present only in the adrenal medulla, or it can occur in other areas also? What is the common area where along which it can develop and it can become secretory in nature?
The parasympathetic.
Parasympathetic or sympathetic?
Sympathetic in the
sympathetic chain.
Sympathetic chain.
Ganglia. Okay, so ganglionoma. Okay, that is there. So it can develop anywhere along the line of the sympathetic ganglia and become an extra adrenal site for. So before you take up the patient with a located tumor in the adrenal, which is causing this problem, first you should also exclude the presence of such catecholamine secreting tumors elsewhere in the body. Without that, if you do, you may be landing up with a patient who may still have severe hypertension post-operatively also. So it is better to locate the presence of other catecholamine secreting tumors present in elsewhere in the body, and then confirm that it is located only in one adrenal or in both. Sometimes it may occur bilaterally also, and then go ahead and plan your surgery. Okay. Is there any isotope study that you can do in cases where there is no obvious tumor
IUD
found out?
123 MIBG scans, scintigraphy can be done.
Okay. What is the purpose? What is the concept behind doing this test?
These chromaffin cells, these uptake this contrast, and it can be seen by the gamma camera. And it's mainly for the extra adrenal and multiple malignant tumors or even recurrent tumors. We can study with this.
Very good, very good. So now in your slide you have put radiographic evaluation, CT bar MRI. Okay, which one you prefer will be better, CT or MRI?
CT.
Huh?
CT.
MRI.
MRI.
What is the advantage of MRI over CT? What are all the advantages of doing an MRI over a CT for locating and identifying the pheochroma tumor?
The radiation exposure is not there in MRI, sir.
Okay. Yeah, very good.
Even pregnant patients also MRI can be done.
Very good.
And the soft tissues, other soft tissues also can. Soft tissues MRI can be seen better.
Do you have to give a contrast for doing an MRI to locate these tumors? Not required. That is the second advantage. One is radiation exposure is not there. Second, there is no need for any contrast injection. And third is it produces better identification of even small tumors and better differentiation. Okay, so these are the 4 advantages that are claimed for MRI over CT scan. Okay. So by doing all these things, you make a diagnosis that it is located only in the left adrenal. There is a mass of about say 1 centimeter by 4 centimeters, and all the biochemical evaluations show that it is a classical case of pheochromocytoma by the increased levels of all the catecholamines as well as metanephrines and normetanephrines, the metabolic products. Now this patient is willing for surgery and the patient has been posted for surgery. Can you immediately operate tomorrow after seeing that she is only 40 years old, heart lung functions are normal, kidney function is okay, no neurological deficit, only the BP is high?
No, sir. Adequate pre-op optimization of this patient is required. Ideally, 10 to 14 days before the surgery, we should prepare the patient.
Very
So
good.
initially, I'd like to start the patient on alpha blockers. So alpha blockers, mainly phenoxybenzamin. These are non-selective, non-competitive, irreversible, long-acting blockades. So OD doses are usually preferred for this. So initially start the patient on 10 mg OD, and then for every 3 to 4 days, we can increase the dose up to 10 to 20 mg till the BP control or even postal changes get better. And then if the others in other patients, the most common side effect of this drug is that it can be somnolence and can be cause orthostatic hypotension can be there. And post-operative after dissection also hypotension chances are there for this drug. So sometimes nowadays prazosin is also the other drug which can be used. Prazosin is more of an alpha-1 selective blocking agent, and this can cause a postal hypotension. So this drug is mostly preferred to be started in the night time. So 1 mg per day it can be started, and a maximum of 8 mg per day to 16 mg per day can be given. And long-term mainly it is given for long-term treatment patients or inoperable or malignant pheochromocytomas. If still the rate is not able to control, then for heart rate control or patients with any cardiac issues or arrhythmias, then I would like to add the patient on beta blocker. The beta blocker is not given as a first drug of choice because there can be some, because of the beta action, there can be unopposed vasoconstriction, alpha acting vasoconstriction, which can further increase the BP. It can cause cardiac depression and can precipitate even acute heart failure and even pulmonary edema. So because of this, I would like the patient to first start an alpha blocker, try to control the BP, and then go for a beta blockade for the rate control alone. And then if still I'm not able to control the BP, then add the patient on calcium channel blockers like nicardipine, nifedipine and all. And or else even other drugs like AC inhibitors, clonidine, dexmedetomidine, all that also can be added as a third drug of choice. The main drug to be avoided is diuretics because already these patients are in a volume contracted state. So diuretics can further worsen it. So that is the drug we should avoid. There's one more drug which they had been using was alpha-methyltyrosine. This drug is mainly acting on the tyrosine enzyme, which is the rate-limiting step of this formation of the epinephrines and norepinephrines. So it is a drug which acts directly on the tyrosine hydroxylase enzyme, and it inhibits that step itself. Initially they used to give 250 mg and up to of 4 grams also it was given, sir. But now it is not being used much.
Excellent, very good. Now, you first said phenoxybenzamin is a non-selective, non-competitive blocker. What do you mean by that word? Those two adjectives you added to phenoxybenzamin, what do you mean by those words?
So there alpha receptor is alpha 1 and alpha 2. So it acts on both. It's not any selective to any of the alpha receptor.
Very good.
And non
Is the action equal on both the receptors, both alpha 1 and alpha 2?
Yes, sir.
So it will produce bronchoconstriction and all these things because of usage. The vasoconstriction will be prevented majority, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
What about alpha 2 action? Where are the actions of alpha 2 receptors?
It is mainly the presynaptic, sir. Inhibits the norepinephrine release.
Okay, but what do you mean by the word non-competitive?
It does not go and compete with the receptor, same receptor, sir.
Compete with what? Compete for the receptor with what hormone or transmitter?
Acetylcholine.
Is it acetylcholine the competitor for that? Presynaptic transmitter? postsynaptic transmitters which are going to act on the vessel wall?
Norepinephrine.
Norepinephrine. Okay. So what is the importance? Even if you increase the dose of norepinephrine in the blood by giving exogenously, you cannot remove the action or stop the action of phenoxybenzamin. That is a very important point. That is why when you treat a patient with lot of phenoxybenzamin in the preoperative period, post-operatively when there is a hypotension, it is very difficult to revive that hypotension by giving its competitor norepinephrine. Okay, that is the main point that you have to understand by the word non-competitive alpha blocker. Right? Okay. Now you have spoken full in detail about it. How do you know that the treatment you have given with phenoxybenzamin is sufficient to control the status of
There
your
is,
chromocytoma? What are the criteria or Roizen's criteria? I've
yes,
heard
sir.
about
It's a
it.
Roizen's criteria, sir, to say that the patient is adequately prepared and you can take the patient for surgery.
What
So
are
the
the
main, yes, sir, the criteria is mainly that the BP should not be more than 160/90 in 24 hours before surgery, and the orthostatic BP on standing, the BP should be more than 80/40 mmHg, and there should be less than 1 VPC in 5 minutes in the ECG, and less than VPC, and STT changes should not be there in the ECG 1 week prior.
If they have not been there, it should have got reverted if it is not a permanent one. Okay, so these are the four criteria by which Roizen says that it is the adequate control of blood pressure with a alpha blocker that has been achieved. Okay.
Even serial hematocrit value should be done, and so that the hematocrit value should be decreasing, sir.
Right. So this is first management is managing the hypertension. What about any other preparation you have to do? You said there will be volume contracted. Do you have to do anything about that?
You should preload the patient, sir, before giving alpha blockers, because it can decrease the preload. So preload the patient adequately also.
Right. Okay. So you have done all these things. How will you continue these drugs pre-operatively on the day of surgery or the day before? If you have given, say, phenoxybenzamin 40 milligram BD is the dosage she requires.
Yes, sir. Phenoxybenzamin should be stopped 24 hours to 48 hours before surgery, because it is a long-acting drug. So it can cause post-operative hypotension after the resection of the tumor. So it should be stopped before surgery, sir.
Okay. So will all the patients require only phenoxybenzamin or alpha blocker first, or are there any conditions where you can straight away start the patient on beta blocker instead of alpha blocker? You said alpha blocker should not be given without adequate control of alpha blocking effect, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Is there any exception to this rule? Is there any case where you can straight away start for beta blocker therapy instead of alpha blocker therapy? We have already said there can be some cases where epinephrine production is more than the norepinephrine. And we have seen their clinical picture behavior of how the blood pressure will behave. If they have only systolic hypertension and no diastolic hypertension, and they have tachycardia instead of reflex bradycardia, and while measuring the plasma epinephrine level or plasma free metanephrine levels, if it predominantly shows a epinephrine production, then those patients will behave badly by putting them on alpha blocker. Okay, so it is better to put them on beta blocker first and very small doses of alpha blocker. So the only exception where you have to start beta blocker without alpha blocker is cases diagnosed with more epinephrine production because of the achromocytoma. Okay, that you have to make sure that you know this point before you start the patient on this treatment, right? Okay.
Okay.
So the patient has been adequately volume loaded, adequately blood pressure controlled. Now patient is posted for surgery. What is your management? In what way it is going to be different from a routine tumor resection above the kidney?
So first, initially the monitors, I would like to connect the patient with monitors. So initially standard monitors like pulse oximetry, non-invasive BP and ECG and temperature monitoring should be done. And then mainly for this patient with pheochromocytoma, invasive blood pressure monitoring, arterial blood pressure monitoring is a must. And patients with any pulmonary kind of like fluid increased state or any congestive cardiac heart failure state, then CVP monitoring also is required. And urinary monitoring should be done. So catheterization should be done for this patient. Urinary catheterization should be done.
Okay.
So then pre-medication. So pre-medication, you should after optimizingly controlling the patient, the rate and thing, then I would like to give the patient glycopyrrolate, and some sedation also should be given, anxiolysis, because the patient can get stress can also again aggravate her condition. So can give some midazolam and opioids, fentanyl can be given, sir. And then for after adequate pre-oxygenation, then for induction, I would like to prefer etomidate or propofol. Avoid thiopentone because it can release histamines. So it can again affect produce stress release. And even ketamine should be avoided, sir, in induction. And as far as the muscle relaxants is concerned, I would like to prefer vecuronium. Try to avoid suxamethonium because it's directly acting on the sympathetic nervous system, and it's also increasing the intra-abdominal pressure, and further it increases the rate and BP. And atracurium should be avoided because it increases the histamine release. So it should also vecuronium is the muscle relaxant of choice. And maintenance should be done with O2 nitrous and isoflurane or sevoflurane. Avoid halothane and the volatiles. And then for analgesics, morphine should be avoided, sir. Other drugs to be avoided are metoclopramide, droperidol. These are dopamine antagonists. So these also should be avoided, sir. So GA with epidural can be is the plan of surgery, sir.
Yeah. So that is.
And before intubation also to avoid to attenuate the scopy responses. So I would like to give IV Loxigard 1.5 mg per kg, and even esmolol also can be given, sir, 50 mics to 100 mics before the intubation. So can reduce the stress response.
Okay. What are the stages of surgery during which you can expect a paroxysmal episodes of hypertension happening?
So hypertension mainly during the vigorous handling of surgery of the tumors.
Oh, from your anesthesia itself, can it cause?
Yes, sir. Mainly during induction. So anesthesia, that is the main stress for the intubation response. So that is one of the main stress factor. And nowadays with the laparoscopic surgeries, the CO2 insufflation can also further exaggerate the situation. And if the patient is not maintaining adequate plane or adequate depth of anesthesia coming out of the relaxant, and if adequate analgesic is not there, again that can be an issue. It can precipitate hypertensive crisis. So adequate, all that should also be there. And bladder, so catheterization also should be done because the bladder fullness can again precipitate this crisis. So all this, and mainly during the surgery point, vigorous manipulation by the surgeon can precipitate hypertensive crisis.
Okay. How do you manage the fluid intraoperatively?
So if a CVP line is there, CVP monitoring will be helpful for giving us a guide about the fluid management is adequate or not. And depending upon the urine.
So CVP monitor is only an option or it's a must?
It's optional.
Not necessary, it should be always present there.
Not necessary.
Not necessary. Then when will you think of using a pulmonary artery catheter? CVP is mandatory. So CVP is, don't say it is not optional. It is mandatory to adjust the fluids. But pulmonary artery catheter is indicated in cases which have already had some cardiac involvement, like long-standing hypertension with cardiomyopathy or LVH with poor left ventricular function. All these cases, it is mandatory you have the pulmonary catheter also. Okay, and maintain the PCWP between 15 to 18 millimeters of mercury. Okay, so with that only you adjust the fluid status apart from the urine output and the surgical field loss. Okay. So that is very important, right? So how to manage the intraoperative hypertensive crisis that can happen due to handling or other reasons, as you what you enumerated, inadequate anesthesia, pain, and all these factors.
So it is, since it's a known case of pheochromocytoma, you should always keep in ready all this alpha blocking drugs and beta blockers that loaded, so that anytime we anticipate it's a crisis going to come, so we can start the patient on esmolol because it's an ultra short acting. The T-off is less than 5 seconds. So you can give esmolol and control it, or else even sodium nitroprusside or NTG infusions can be started, sir. So at the rate of 0.5 to 10 mics per kg per minute, infusion can be started. So
What are the disadvantages and advantages of NTG infusion? Have you ever used NTG in your practice?
Yes, sir.
Very good. Is it coming as a powder or as a liquid?
Liquid, sir.
Huh?
NTG liquid, sir.
NTG liquid. NTG, I'm SNP. I'm sorry, I'm asking about SNP, not NTG.
Yes, SNP is a lipophiliced form, sir. Powder, sir.
Powder. Okay. So how do you prepare the SNP infusion? What are the requisites of SNP infusion?
The SNP infusion is usually prepared in the NS or D5 solution, sir. And it should be covered with a cloth or something. Photo degradation can occur, sir. So because of that, you should cover the fluid with the cloth, sir.
What about the IV set? Can it
IV set
travel?
also. Yes, sir. Glass should be used and specialized IV sets because PVC absorption can occur, sir. So because for that also specialized sets should be used.
What are the disadvantages of sodium nitroprusside usage?
There's chance of cyanide toxicity, sir, but in more
Straight away cyanide toxicity, or initially something else happens before cyanide toxicity can happen?
Methemoglobinemia.
Tachyphylaxis. First thing is tachyphylaxis. As you start using SNP, initially there will be a very good response with immediate reduction in the blood pressure. Is it an arterial or dilator or a venodilator or both?
Both, sir.
It is a arteriolar and venodilator, whereas NTG
the venodilator more
the
than
selective more venodilator. So SNP causes much more dramatic fall in blood pressure compared to NTG, but after you start infusing it for a period of time, the dosage needs to be increased because the body develops what is called tachyphylaxis. So once you keep on increasing the dosage because there is a lesser response, that will only land you up in what is known as cyanide toxicity. And
yes, sir.
This hypotension produced in SNP, what is it associated with compared to NTG? With the heart rate? It will be tachycardia, reflex tachycardia will happen. Okay, so that may sometimes require a beta blocker also. Whereas NTG usually produces only hypotension and normal rate. It will not cause any reflex tachycardia like SNP. Okay. So how do you identify whether the patient has gone in for cyanide toxicity when you use SNP? Is there any way we can say that this patient is likely to develop a cyanide toxicity, and if you suspect cyanide toxicity, how will you treat it? And what type of poisoning that cyanide produces?
Histotoxic.
Histotoxic. Cyanide toxicity is one of the questions asked in your theory paper also. How to manage the ICU management, OPCP, that is organophosphorus poisoning, cyanide poisoning, are all very repeatedly asked questions, especially DNPPGs. Okay, so cyanide toxicity is a mitochondrial poison. Actually, it produces what is called histotoxic anoxia. So the mitochondria is not able to utilize the oxygen and go for this regular phosphorylation and ATP production. Okay, that is how it stops the machinery of mitochondrial ATP production. And the treatment for cyanide toxicity is using the sodium hypochlorite, which will be combining with that, or be well, simple cyanocobalamin that can also be injected, which will cyanamide hemoglobin will be formed and it can be excreted. Okay, these are all the points that you have to remember with regard to SNT. Right. So crisis is managed by infusion of any of these two drugs. Right. So laparoscopically, these surgeries are nowadays carried out, and the tumor has been successfully removed. Post surgery, completion of surgery, what are the problems you can anticipate?
Post surgery, the patient can have after resection of or clamping or resection of the tumor hypotension, sir, because there is sudden withdrawal of the catecholamine hormones. So the patient can go
When
for
will the
hypotension.
actual withdrawal of cortical infusion into the bloodstream will occur?
After 24 hours, sir, 24 to 48 hours. So
Intraoperatively, won't it happen?
after,
At what
Adrenal
stage?
vein.
after
The clamping or ligation of the adrenal vein. That time itself it will stop because that is the route for entry, isn't it? So that will be the time from which you will start the hypotension. So hypotension can happen immediately after the clamping or ligation of the adrenal veins, or it can happen immediate post-op and continue for even 3 to 7 days post-operatively. When will the hypotension not get lowered? It will continue to be hypertension both even in the post-op. In which condition you will have a continued hypertensive presence even after a successful removal of the tumor.
any extra adrenal tumors or
Pardon?
any extra adrenal sites if we had missed
Yeah,
it?
if you have missed any extra adrenal site, very good. Supposing you have extensively investigated, done all the MRI, MIB scan, everything has been done, and no other extra adrenal or bilateral presence, only one tumor has been identified, and you have done that. But still, patient is not getting a reduction in the hypertension. What could be the reason?
Pain, sir? Pain.
Pain.
Post-operative analgesia is not adequate.
Adequate, that will be only for a short period. Once you give an pain relieving drug, it should automatically get controlled. But in spite of adequate pain relief and adequate fluid resuscitation, can a patient continue to be hypertensive?
Oh, yes, sir.
It can happen. Sometimes, up to 7 days it takes to resolve from the original hypertension. So it is not that all patients will behave in the same way with severe hypotension post-operatively. Some patients may continue to have hypertension for up to 1 week and then only settle down. Okay, but most commonly you will see only a hypotension happening immediately after clamping the adrenal veins, as well as after the post extubation and that period patient will have continued hypotension. So what are all the resuscitation or management you should do to manage this hypotension?
Fluids and then vasopressin, dopamine, and phenylephrine can also be started.
So more than depending on vasopressors, first resuscitation is with enormous amounts of fluids have to be given. Okay, so it is the fluid resuscitation that is a challenging thing in these patients. For that only you require a CVP line or a PCA catheter. Okay, so without that you cannot do the fluid resuscitation. So first thing is to go for adequate fluid supplementation and then try for all this. What is the role of norepinephrine in management of the hypotension?
For hypertension.
Phenylephrine you said, as a dopamine you said. Would you prefer to use norepinephrine as a resuscitative drug, vasopressor for maintaining the post-operative, treating the post-operative hypotension? Did you read in any books whether they recommend norepinephrine?
No.
Because already phenoxybenzamide is there, no? That will not work. That is the reason why you should not try norepinephrine. Okay? All other septic shock and other things, first drug of choice is norepinephrine. But in this case, it is the other two drugs, directly acting drugs, which are phenylephrine and dopamine. Okay, so that is how you try to correct it and not with norepinephrine. Okay, so these are the problems that you have to know, right? Good. So I don't think we have to have any points you think you have missed out? Because this will be
Post-operative hypoglycemia also can come, sir, because this catecholamine withdrawal,
withdrawal, yes. So
increase can
insulin levels will go. They go for hypoglycemia.
hypoglycemia.
So that is another important point that you have to remember.
Yes, sir.
Very good, right? So that will be the as far as I know, this is because this is a very rare scenario that you may come across, and more for answering your theory paper. This topic will be useful. Okay, so very good presentation, Dr. Akshata. Very nice. Thank you. Congratulations.
Sir, one doubt selection.
Please ask.
Sir, actually, to avoid, we have to avoid all stresses while doing a superficial procedures like starting an IV line or epidural, whatever it may be.
That is all more theoretical, you know what happens once you have a very successful phenoxybenzamin block. These small painful procedures will not cause any problem unless or for that you can apply EMLA cream and avoid that. So that will be a better way of avoiding any noxicystic stimulus when the patient is conscious. So if you have, that is why the Trojan criteria, if the blood pressure is maintained between 160 and 95 for the previous 24 hours, it will be invariably normal. It will not go up. And it will go up only during laryngoscopy and intubation and during the intraoperative procedure while handling the tumor. So the surgeon should inform you that he is going to handle the tumor, and you must be adequately prepared with all the vasodilators so that you can immediately manage that situation. Okay.
And extubation also we have to be careful.
Yeah, both. That is where nowadays, if you give dexmedetomidine, it will be an ideal drug to combine with, which is not mentioned in most of the textbooks because they are all little older textbooks. Now with the newer advent of dexmedetomidine used both intraoperatively along with the analgesic and during, but only problem is supposing the patient goes for severe hypotension, dexmedetomidine will compound that. It will increase that hypotension. But small doses used towards the end to tolerate the tube will be not very in my experience, don't go for that classical description of 1 microgram per kg IV bolus with 0.2 to 0.7 IV infusion. That dosage produces very severe drop in blood pressure and bradycardia. So I always use empirical doses of 10 to 20 micrograms in any patient, irrespective of the body weight, as an initial bolus, and then use 0.2 microgram as an infusion. In that way, I have found the usage does not cause any sudden hypotension or brady.
Yes, sir. Is ISO better than SIVO or SIVO is better?
Now don't make dexflurane should be avoided because dexflurane causes catecholamine sensitization. So between CO and ISO, both are equally good. There is no difference between the two.
Okay, thank you.
So the Kamachi?
Yes, sir.
My PPT is not complete, but I will just share it to stress on a few points. Okay. So this is the adrenal gland, which is present on the top of both the kidneys. Okay, it's a triangular structure which has blood supply coming, arterial supply coming directly from the aorta, and vein joining the IVC. So just like the renal vein and renal artery, you have a separate artery and venous supply coming from the major vessels directly to the adrenal gland. And if you take a transverse section, it has got a capsule, it has got a cortex, and it has got a medulla. Okay? And if you make a histological section, you have the three zones in the cortex. Okay, they are the GFR, zona glomerulosa, zona fasciculata, and zona reticularis, with the medullary cells here. Okay, so this is the histological arrangement with all the vessels going there, and you have to know about the clinical physiology, catecholamine physiology and pathophysiology. That can be asked. You have to describe that in your theory answer also. And how common this is only 0.1% in the population you will come across this case. So it's a quite rare condition. But people dealing with exclusive endocrine disorders may come across this condition more than many of our common anesthetists practicing surgery, I mean, for general surgical conditions. And the diagnosis you have to do between the two things. One is biochemical diagnosis of confirmation of diagnosis, like measuring the metabolic products in the urine, like metanephrine or normetanephrine and VMA, or you have to go for plasma levels of catecholamines or their metabolic products. And localization of the gland, not only at the from common site of adrenal but also from other sites, is very, very important. And the management you have to divide into four. And the last point is very important. This we have now discussed a little bit. Pre-operative preparation, operative, post-operative, which we have all dealt so nicely now. But in pregnancy, supposing very rarely you may come across a patient with pheochromocytoma coming for pregnancy. In that situation, what they advocate is, if you can control the blood pressure during intraoperative, during the pregnancy, then you can combine the surgery for pheochromocytoma and do an LSCS first, deliver the baby, and in the same setting proceed for doing the excision of the adrenal tumor. And one more point we have forgotten in the post-operative period. If it is a bilateral resection of adrenal gland for bilateral tumors of the pheochromocytoma, then you will be removing not only the medulla but also the cortex. So cortisol depletion will happen. So we have to supplement the cortisol in cases where bilateral surgery is done. So that point also we have to remember. And this is the way the catecholamine producing cells exist in other places. So the neural crust is the embryological part from which all these neural elements develop. So sympathoadrenal progenitor cells are called neuroblasts. So it may be a neuroblastoma which is may be developing. This neuroblast develops into sympathetic ganglion as well as chromaffin cell. And chromaffin cells can be in the intraadrenal or extraadrenal, which is called the classical pheochromocytoma. And sympathetic ganglion may be ganglioneuroma, which also is capable of producing this. So this is the embryological development. The neural plate with it is arising from the epidermis or ectoderm. Okay, and then there is a dimple here in the middle developing in the neural plate, which is, and it has a border between the epidermis and the neural plate. Then it makes a groove. This dimple becomes a groove by convergence, and then it becomes a neural canal or a neural tube. Okay. Then the epidermis joins there. The border cells, they become the neural crest cells. The green things are neural crest cells. So neuroendocrine tumor of the medulla of the adrenal glands originate from the chromaffin cells along with the paravertebral sympathetic chain extending from pelvis to base of skull. So you can see the entire extension from the large areas, and 95% are abdominal, more than 90% in adrenal medulla, secretes excessive amounts of adrenaline and noradrenaline. 80% occur as a unilateral swelling. Now this is the rule of 10 that you have to remember. 10% are extra-adrenal. and 10% occur in children, 10% familial, 10% bilateral or multiple, 10% recur, and 10% are malignant, and 10% discovered incidentally. You keep thinking that the patient is only essential hypertensive, and suddenly when they come for some surgery, the BP goes on, in spite of all your adequate anesthetic depth and plane, and with all the care, if the BP continues to grow, then only you try to diagnose that it may be a case of pheochromocytoma, which has been hidden all these days. So the physiology of formation of tyrosine, before this, there is a essential amino acid, as Dr. Akshita correctly said, it's a phenylalanine. Phenylalanine. If you know that only, you will be able to expand this DOPA. Okay. So this is first converted by this enzyme tyrosine hydroxylase to L-DOPA, then to dopamine, then it is converted to norepinephrine and epinephrine. So this synthetic steps you have to remember, and these are the enzymes which break down the dopamine, and this is the enzyme catecholamine O-methyl transferase, which breaks down both the norepinephrine and epinephrine. And the product you get is homovanillic acid from dopamine, normetanephrine from norepinephrine, metanephrine from epinephrine, and both are then converted. Final product is phenylamandelic acid. Okay, so previously we used to test for the presence of phenylamandelic VMA only in the urine. And later on we started measuring both metanephrine and normetanephrine. Then there may be some questions asked on the physiology of adrenergic receptors, which also can be asked in the examination. If you are given a case scenario like this and then asked, a discussion is there. So there are two types of receptors. One is alpha receptor and beta receptor. The alpha is divided again into alpha 1 and alpha 2. Beta is divided into beta 1, beta 2 and beta 3. So the alpha 1 mainly is for vasoconstriction, and it produces intestinal relaxation, uterine contraction and pupillary dilatation. Alpha 2 decreases presynaptic norepinephrine, with clonidine, platelet aggregation, decreased insulin secretion. These are all the effects of alpha 2. And beta 1 increases the heart rate, contractility, increases lipolysis, increases renin secretion. Beta 2 is a bronchodilator, which we all know that we use it as an inhalation agent in bronchial asthma, vasodilatation, glycogenolysis. And beta 3 is mainly for lipolysis, especially brown fat thermogenesis in children. So they are all called G protein coupled receptors. Okay, so this what is this G protein coupled receptors? Many of the students, when I ask them, they are not able to explain properly. I will show it in the next slide. And the features, signs and symptoms of pheochromocytoma are the 5 P's you can remember: pressure, pain, perspiration, palpitation and pallor. Okay, these are this. Of this pain, that is headache, sweating, palpitation, these three form what is called the classical triad, which is not commonly seen in cases of essential hypertension. Whereas in patients with phyllo, this will happen paroxysmally, suddenly, and it will be associated with all the three features. Now this is the G protein coupled receptor structure, which is it is a 7. The other name for this is serpentine or 7-pass receptor, because the pathway goes like a serpent, bending many times, and it traverses the cell membrane 7 times. So the other name for GPRC, G protein and GPCR, G protein coupled receptor, is 7-pass receptor or serpentine receptor. So what happens? This is the place where the ligand or the transmitter substance should come and occupy. Once it is occupied, the signal is transferred by all these route to inside, where there is a G protein. The expansion of G is the guanyl cyclase protein. So this protein has got three, it's a trimeric protein with a different one alpha and one beta and one gamma. So once the signal comes here, the beta and gamma subunits, they as a single unit, they separate from the alpha. That is what will happen. You will see here the G protein activation, the hormone or whatever ligand has to come and it will come and occupy here. Once it is occupying the receptor, what will happen? The alpha unit of this trimeric protein will be separated from the beta gamma dimeric unit, and this will be converting the GTP into GDP. It's always having a GDP will be converted to GTP. I mean, GDP will be converted to GTP, and this GTP and alpha unit will go and stimulate another protein called adenylate cyclase, and this adenylate cyclase will stimulate ATP, which will stimulate the cyclic AMP, which will activate the intracellular signaling. So if this whole thing happens, this is called a GS protein, that is G stimulatory protein. Most of the adrenergic receptors will act like this to stimulate the intracellular signaling system. On the contrary, if this action is blocked, then it is called GI protein, where the cyclic AMP formation can be blocked and you will reduce the signaling system. Then it is called a GI protein. And there is a third one called the GQ protein, which will be seen here. For example, see, when you stimulate the GS protein, it goes to stimulate the adenylate cyclase, converts ATP into PPA and then CPA, protein kinase A. This is the pathway for the stimulatory protein. If you block this, then it becomes an inhibitory protein. Whereas in GQ, there is a third method of GPCR, where it will stimulate what is called the phospholipase C, that is the enzyme. Here it is adenylate cyclase, here it is phospholipase C, which will cause the breakdown of inositol phosphate. So that will be broken down and diacyl glycerol will be formed. That is a different pathway which happens in some of the alpha receptors. So all the alpha, beta receptors, your opioid receptors, all of them are acting through this mechanism only. And this is also called the metabotropic receptor pattern. Okay, the other name for the entire group of acting this is called the metabotropic. So if you see this picture where epinephrine is stimulated by CPA, how it causes the cyclic AMP synthesis is in the resting stage, epinephrine is separately there, the receptor is not occupied, and the G protein is together with the alpha, beta subunits and gamma subunits all together. Adenylate cyclase is separately there. Now epinephrine comes and occupies the ligand space on the outer side of the cell membrane. The signal is passed on inside. This beta gamma subunit is separated. The alpha subunit is with the ATP now goes and then stimulates the adenylate cyclase, which again this ATP from there stimulates the cyclic AMP, so which causes the increase in heart rate, dilatation of skeletal muscle. All the effects are produced by that. So this is how the thing works. Now catecholamines that are secreted can be three types. All the precursors, including the precursor dopamine, the pheochromocytoma cells can produce dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine. If more norepinephrine is secreted than epinephrine with a ratio of 85 to 15, which is the reversal of normal. In normal health, epinephrine will be 80%, 85%, and norepinephrine will be 15%. Whereas in pheo, it is reverse. Norepinephrine is produced 85 and epinephrine 15%. Whereas in small percentage, epinephrine can be secreted more than norepinephrine. This is a very low percentage of the patients. So patients who secrete more norepinephrine have systolic and diastolic hypertension with bradycardia, whereas patients who secrete more epinephrine have more systolic hypertension, diastolic hypotension, and tachycardia. Or rather, it will be a normal diastolic pressure, and that will be having a tachycardia. So this is the difference between the. So clinically, you can make out if the patient has both systolic, diastolic with a brady, that is a norepinephrine dominated PO. Whereas if you have a systolic hypertension, normal diastolic pressure, and tachycardia, then they are dominantly producing epinephrine. Okay. So the cardiac manifestation in these conditions can be sinus tachycardia will be there in epinephrine producing tumors. Bradycardia can be there. You can have supraventricular tachycardia, ectopics. These are all things which will happen later when the condition remains for a long time without treatment. Then the patients will develop all these problems of ectopics, ventricular tachycardia, and all these things. And catecholamine induced myocardial oxygen consumption increase, coronary spasm, angina, MI, cardiomyopathy, and congestive cardiac failure, myocarditis, concentric hypertrophy, asymmetrical hypertrophy, all these things can happen. Then neurological manifestations can be in the form of hypertensive encephalopathy. This is the main reason for a patient not recovering after a general anesthesia, especially if they have had asymptomatic pheochromocytoma. I remember one incident where one of my friend who was working abroad, he was asked to anesthetize a 40-year-old lady for a hysterectomy procedure. And on the table, the starting blood pressure was only 140/80. And once surgery was started under general anesthesia, gradually the blood pressure started going up. And it went up to 190, 110 at one stage, and any amount of antihypertensives and venodilators, vasodilators could not bring down the BP. By the time surgery was over and patient was not recovering, then something struck him and he asked for a plasma metanephrine level, and it was quite high. Then they made the diagnosis, and the patient remained unconscious for almost 24 hours, and she needed ventilation and all that. MRI was done, and they found that there was a small tumor in the adrenal also. So they had to do a second surgery immediately the next day to remove the tumor. Then only the patient settled. So that much of problem can happen sometimes. Okay. So stroke due to infarction and intracerebral bleed. Then the metabolic changes, patients can have hypercalcemia, especially associated with multiple endocrine neoplasia, and mild glucose intolerance, suppression of insulin secretion, glycogenolysis with, because of norepinephrine, and so polyuria, lipolysis, all these things are the metabolic changes. Sometimes they may have what is called the familial pheo, where there is two categories, type 2A and 2B, which are associated with carcinoma in other areas like medullary carcinoma of the thyroid or hyperparathyroidism, or mucosal neuroma and Marfanoid features. And there are some syndromes called von Hippel-Lindau and von Recklinghausen syndrome. All these things are associated with some neural defects in elsewhere in the body. And familial paraganglionoma, all these things are very rare conditions. As it is the pheo itself a rare one, these are much more rarer than that, but sometimes they are associated with that. Now, to make a diagnosis of this with a low probability of a patient with pheo, you have to do a 24-hour urine collection for metanephrine estimation and catecholamine estimation. So, in a patient with high possibility, you can measure them in the plasma itself. Okay, because these patients may not have that much of the metabolites in the blood. So you collect the urine and do this. Whereas in patients with a high possibility where the secretion is more, you can do the measurement in the plasma itself. And the levels more than 400 picogram per ml for normetanephrine and 220 picogram for metanephrine or diagnostic. So if the values are not very conclusive and equivocal, then you go for this suppression or stimulation test. And clonidine suppression, usually they decrease the catecholamines. Unlike normals, patients with FeO won't suppress their plasma nor epinephrine. So the BP will remain same in pheochromocytoma patients. That is the main point you have to remember. And in glucagon, it may precipitate a hypertensive crisis. Previously, they were giving histamine, which produces a lot of morbidity and even mortality. So now they have switched over from histamine to glucagon for stimulation, and patients with FeO will have a threefold increase in the plasma norepinephrine with glucagon. Okay, so this also is very risky. So people now don't do that, but previously, because of a want of other investigations, they were resorting to all these things. Then the other important thing, after confirming the diagnosis by establishing the or measuring the various catecholamine and their metabolic products, before taking up for surgery, you have to do the location of the tumor. For that, the MRI is very, very useful. Better identification of small lesions, better differentiation of various types, and the lack of radiation exposure and no need for contrast injection. And this meta-iodobenzyl guanidine, which is an analog of guanethidine, which is absorbed, as she said, by the postsynaptic membranes, will be help in identifying tumors which are not diagnosed or identified by MRI or CT scan. Okay. In the pre-operative preparation, alpha blockade to control hypertension and correction of volume status. These are the two important things which you have to take care of. And prevention of paroxysmal episodes of hypertension, decrease the myocardial dysfunction. And phenoxybenzamine is the drug of choice, which is a non-competitive alpha-1 blocker with minimal alpha-2 blocking effect. So you have to do a combination of alpha and beta blocker, but fastest not only with phenoxybenzamine. It may need at least 10 to 14 days, and start with a normal low dose and increase it by every 2 days, so that you achieve the correct dose to get in a proper BP control. So maintenance may require up to 40 to 80 milligrams. Okay. And here is one condition where you think that producing a postural hypotension is the clinical indicator of adequate dosage. So until such time, you can go on be increasing it. That was the previous guideline that they used to say that you can only condition where postural hypertension is recommended is phenoxybenzamine usage. Then the side effects are orthostatic hypotension, reflex tachycardia. Drawback is pre-op hypotension, which can continue because of the continued effect. It's a very long-acting drug. So once a day or twice a day dosage is more than enough. That is why they now started using the shorter acting drugs like prazosin and terazosin, which are also alpha blockers, but shorter duration. You can titrate them better. So once the tachycardia happens, you have to introduce the beta blocker. And the beta blocker of choice is non-selective beta blocker propranolol, started at the dose of 40 milligram. To control the heart rate, and you can go, and this is parenterally available also. So in cases where there is a tachycardia, you can use them intravenously. So this is the Roizen's criteria where you have to evaluate the adrenergic blockade. Arterial BP less than 160/95 in the last 48 hours, not 24 hours. Recommended to measure in stressful environment also. Mild orthostatic hypotension, but optimal BP should not be less than 80/45. ECG free of ST changes for at least 2 weeks, and ventricular ectopics less than 1/5 minutes. Okay, so I didn't have time to prepare it further. Sorry, and that will reduce the. Okay. So,
Role of phentolamine, sir.
role of
Phentolamine.
phentolamine is IV phentolamine. You can't titrate it so easily like other drugs. That is a disadvantage. Any drug which when you want to do it parenterally and in an acute stage, it is better to go for shorter acting drugs so that we can titrate. Supposing you give phenethylamine and it's a long acting drug and it produces extended blockade, then you will be in trouble. So when that will not be in a preoperative crisis, when you are dealing with a severe paroxysmal hypertensive episode, there you can try that, but intraoperatively that will not be an ideal drug.
Okay, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. It was
Thank you.
a wonderful session.
Thank you.
And any more